Thanks, guys. Okay. Thanks, Arthi, for the intro. So, hi, my name's Preet. So this started actually roughly end of May or so. And I was just surfing the internet. I read an article based actually on an interview with Ron Howard, celebrated Hollywood director. You know, he's done Apollo 13, The Da Vinci Code, bunch of other things. He had directed Solo, the latest entrant in the Star Wars story. This was released May last year, 2018 or so. And the movie kind of bombed. It actually made about close to 400 million based on a $300 million budget, about 275 and change. And he said there are a few, you know, he cited a number of reasons, but the one I found interesting was essentially, he said the Memorial Day release is the one that really affected things. He mentioned a couple of other things, but this is the one that really caught my eye. He says the release date mattered a lot. He says previous releases had been done during Christmas. You know, Memorial Day wasn't something that should have been done. So I was like, how exactly do I find out something about, you know, how exactly would I test out his theory? I said the first thing obviously is, you know, let me find a good data set. I checked out a couple of data sets. TMDB, I think, had a 5,000 movie data set on Kaggle. Eventually landed up with, there's an unofficial group lens data set on Kaggle that combines TMDB information. It's about 45,500 movies, about 26 features, but I really only need the release date and, you know, the revenue and maybe the budget. Nothing really beyond that. So this is, if you're not familiar, TMDB Group Lens is actually a research group, I believe, out of the University of Minnesota. They've got a lot of great non-commercial data sets on the movie industry for use. And I think they've got a few of those released on Kaggle as well. And you can get the gigantic ones if you write to them directly. By the way, this is I found, you know, the data set is full of cool little snippets like this. They've, the oldest movie in the data set is from 1874. This is actually The Passage of Venus. It's a series of photographs of Venus as it passes across the sun. So the first thing I said is Ron Howard said Memorial Day is a bad release date. Does he mean that in absolute terms, or does he mean that in relative terms? And a couple of things. In absolute terms, essentially means the release date's going to be, you know, in the entire universe of release dates. Memorial Day is really, really bad, right? It's ranked at the bottom. Relative terms, he means maybe according to Christmas, because he said the other ones released on Christmas, the other Star Wars movies. So I said, let's check that out. Let's check out the hypothesis a little bit over there. Now, I don't know much about the movie business before this. A few assumptions I had, which turned out to be somewhat wrong, were the majority of movies releases on Fridays. I thought probably like 80 or 90% of movies normally release on Fridays. And holiday weekends mean strictly the Friday prior. You know, Memorial Day is a great release day on paper. That's what it seems to me. To a layperson. It's the start of summer. It's a 3-day weekend. How could you possibly go wrong? So a few things. When I actually checked the data set, I found out that while Friday is still the most common release date, it's not even the majority. It's not even 50% of the release dates are Friday. It's only about 14,000 over there, or roughly about a third. The other ones, as you can see, Thursday and Wednesday make up about another 15,000, and the remaining 15,000 is across the 4 days, the Saturday, Tuesday, Sunday, and Monday. So this was actually super surprising to me. I thought, you know, Friday would be like 80%, and you know, maybe Thursday or Wednesday takes up a bulk of the remaining 20%, and, you know, there are a few exceptions beyond that. I was not expecting something like this, plurality distribution. So I was like, I've got to rethink a few things. I can't just say Memorial Day has a release. Memorial Day movies have a release date of the Friday before Memorial Day, which is what I initially thought. Then I started doing some reading as well on release dates. And I found a few things. There really are no restrictions on when movies are released. They don't seem to follow an algorithm. A lot of it seems arbitrary. Obviously, there are a lot of decisions happening behind the scenes. But in terms of data, there's no clear-cut pattern. The original Star Wars actually is a great example. In '77, they decided they were going to do a Memorial Day release. But they didn't do it the Friday before the Memorial Day weekend. What they ended up doing was the Wednesday before the Memorial Day weekend. And I don't know why. Maybe people had a lot more free time then. I have no idea whatsoever. But there are actually quite a few examples like that. So I said, how exactly do I do it? You know, and there's certain game theoretic aspects I started discovering. People said, all right, certain movies are being released on Memorial Day. I'm going to release it a week before. Some people are like, I'm going to release it 2 weeks before. And we see this in game theory all the time. It's in auction theory, for example, it's called bid shading. And I was like, how exactly do I respond to that? These are people who essentially want to release on Memorial Day, but they're not releasing it exactly on Memorial Day weekend. So Memorial Day, by the way, if anybody's forgotten, is the last Monday of May. So I said, I'll adjust my model for months. I took it for a couple of weeks, then I saw a few movies released before that to get a head start. So I said, let me adjust my model for months. So a couple of things. Initially, I looked at total revenue by month. I just took an aggregate completely. I haven't adjusted this for inflation or anything. So there is an implicit assumption in this that the number of movies released in a given month is actually static. That obviously is a strong assumption, but for now, it's holding. So a few things. So I looked at, I was looking, a few things. I'm looking at May, right? May, as you can see, is extremely strong. So I said the first thing is to check in absolute terms, do I think May is going to be a bad month for release? Turns out that isn't the case, right? It's better than 9 months. Only June and December are actually doing better than this. If we actually look at the figures, okay, so now in absolute terms, we know that's not the case. What about, if you're comparing December with May? Was Ron Howard onto something? So this is about 6.8 for December. May is roughly like 5.8. That's like a 17-18% difference. That's sizable. That's fairly sizable. Maybe Ron Howard was onto something. A 17-18% difference is significant. However, we have a bit of a problem here. This is total revenue by month. This is a composite metric. Composite metrics, metrics that are composed of 2 or more pieces, especially if they're pulling in different directions, might lead to different conclusions. You see something like this, you're like, oh, December's got a 17-18% jump. Ron Howard was right. The movie should have been released in December. So I said, let's break it down. That's composed of 2 metrics. One is mean revenue by month. So this is roughly, if there's a movie releasing, taking the mean revenue by data across the data set. If there's a movie, for example, being released in December, then it's approximately whatever. That looks like roughly 1.8. 1.8 multiplied by 7, that's about 18 million. So it brings in about 18 million on average. November, if we have a look at, is roughly a little bit less. It's maybe, May. May is fairly close, right over there. May is in fact incredibly close. We're looking at about like a 1.4 or so. That's not much of a difference. We're looking at maybe a 7-8% difference. Now December and May are really, really close. Now you look at this and you're like, if all other things are equal, just based on this, if you release a movie in December, it's going to have maybe 7-8%, maybe less than 10% more business than May. Now the figures start looking to be something within the margin of error. So we've really got to, when we talk about composite metrics, we really have to break it down. We really have to break it down by each of them. So now if we look at this, we see that December over there Let's look at December and December and May on the lower slides. December is about 3,800. May is roughly about 3,200 over. There's like roughly about a 20% difference in, there's roughly about a 20% difference over there in the number of movies. So that's exactly what the total revenue was, is essentially coming out to, right? The total revenue was composed of these two metrics. The first metric says on average, we're looking at 7 or 8% increase if you're releasing the movie in December versus May, if all other things are equal. The second one says about 20% more movies are being released in December. So now I'm looking at this. If I was making the decision, if I wanted to play it safe, if I was risk averse, I would say, you know what, I'm getting a slight bump in December, but I'm getting way more competitors. Why the hell would I release it in December versus May? So this is not, this in fact is telling me that, I probably should stick with May. December is not necessarily a better choice. So by the way, a couple of interesting things in this. If we look at June, which is June's the big moneymaker, we can see that in terms of the count is fairly low, but the revenue is highest over there. The mean revenue is highest, which essentially follows with our intuition. All the big blockbusters will release essentially around June. So that, the figures kind of follow with our intuition. But Jan is the most interesting. Jan's got, and I was really surprised when I saw this, and I didn't know anything about the movie business at that point. Jan has the maximum number of movies released, but they have the lowest mean revenue. I was like, what the hell's happening? And I read up on this. It's a phenomenon called dump months. Apparently, you've got a whole bunch of movies, and studios, these are movies essentially which haven't played well with test audiences. They don't have enough of a marketing budget. Could be any number of reasons. They need to dump it in the theaters at some point. They need a theatrical release, so they dump it in Jan. And I think Feb, and sometimes, they're mentioning August and September are sometimes treated like that. But yeah, Jan's a dump month. So that's essentially what it is. That was something new for me. So essentially, what do we know so far? A couple of things. One is we know that May has the third best performance, only worse than June and December. So in absolute terms, we know that it's that's not the case, that May or Memorial Day by proxy is a bad release date. Is December better than May? I'm not buying it because the performance gap is too small. It's less than 10%, and the risk is too large. You've got 20% more movies being released. So I said, what exactly? Maybe Ron Howard meant something else. Maybe he meant it relative to other Star Wars movies. So I said, let's have a quick look at that. So I said, from the canon, I've selected these 10 movies, including Solo. There are a few other movies I haven't selected, but these are the main theatrical releases that are there. The other ones are, things like, the TV releases or the limited theatrical releases, the small budget ones, and the TV series. So a few things over there. We can see a couple of things over here, right? I mean, straight off, before anything else, let's have a look at the release dates. Out of the 9 movies that are not Solo, 6 of them released around Memorial Day. And by the way, you can see the pattern even over there. One of them released on 5/15. They released it a whole bunch of days before. May, I think, has 31 days. So if you had to do the Friday before, it will have to be 23rd or later. So, but we see, there are a couple that are before, 3, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. So about 6 of these were released around May, to take advantage of the Memorial Day rush. Only 3 of them were released in December. But to be fair, the 3 that are released in December are the ones in the 2010s. So I said, all right, it's definitely not an outlier in terms of the release date if you consider the entire canon. Maybe if you consider the current ones only. So I've left out some movies, obviously. If you haven't seen this, it's a hidden gem. Totally, you should watch this. Yes, absolutely. So I started looking at figures for this because I said, is there any way Solo is an outlier? So a couple of things. There's the budget over there. I've done an adjusted budget. The adjusted budget is very simple. I've simply taken the inflation rates. So for example, I think the original Star Wars in '77 has a multiplicative factor to adjust for inflation of 4.04. So it comes out to the adjusted revenue is like 3.2 billion. A quick note on that. That actually is the only one which is not completely accurate because it turns out that Star Wars, the original revenue was about 775 million. About 500 million and something was on the original release date of '77. But it turns out that they re-released it all the way up till '87 a couple of times. I'm guessing what happened was every time they released one of the sequels, they re-released the entire thing together. So up till '87, it was making money. It made roughly about 200 million and change between '77 and '87. So together, the actual figure, if I knew what the breakdown was, would probably be closer to about 3 billion or maybe 2.9 billion or something. So the adjusted revenue shows that, let's leave aside Solo, but besides Solo, all of them have crossed the $1 billion mark except for Attack of the Clones. And Attack of the Clones had its own story. It followed The Phantom Menace, and we all remember the backlash of The Phantom Menace, or maybe I'm dating myself. Yeah, I don't know if you guys remember Jar Jar Binks. Yeah, so a couple of things. So I looked at this and I said a few things. I said, is it an outlier in any way? Maybe in terms of budget, maybe they didn't spend enough or anything of that sort. I mean, 275 million seems like a great deal to me, but maybe it isn't compared to the rest of the Star Wars canon. No, it's actually up there. It's, let's look at just the last 3 movies because that's the ones they spent the most money on. And the adjusted budget for Force Awakens was about 260 million. For Rogue One was 210 million. For Star Wars, it was about 317 million, so 275 is right over there. It's not like the budget was shortchanged or anything of that sort. So I said, is there any other way it could be an outlier? I said, let's look at critics' reviews. Maybe that might be a thing. So I just checked the Rotten Tomatoes scores very quickly. This little dot right here at the bottom is Solo. So as you can see, there's a whole cluster of dots. So this is Rotten Tomatoes scores on the x-axis. The revenue is on the y-axis. And that essentially means we expect to see a lot of movies on this side and on the upper right quadrant, if they have high figures for both. I've actually adjusted the score between 50 and 100 because I think the lowest score was like 54 or something. Which was, I think, The Phantom Menace. The highest, the bunch of them consistently that are in the 90 range, I think about 3 or 4 of them. So this entire cluster actually did very well. We can see that there is the first line over there is the $1 billion mark. All but 2 are below the $1 billion mark, and one of them is nearly touching it. That's the Attack of the Clones. Attack of the Clones got roughly about 66% Rotten Tomatoes. So in terms of critical reviews, this was actually pretty bad compared to the rest of the Star Wars canon. Yeah, I think it got about 70%, which ordinarily sounds great, right? Just the way 392 million revenue sounds pretty terrific for most movies. But compared to the rest of the Star Wars canon, obviously the take is really bad, the revenue is really bad, and so is the Rotten Tomatoes score. So I was like, okay, there's at least some explanation. This kind of fits in. That the revenue seems to be correlated a little bit with the critical ratings. Sure. They've got a Rotten Tomato score. If you look it up, I think it's 93% or something like that. Yeah. Yes. So, no. So Rotten Tomatoes is an aggregate of, they have an algorithm that assigns a score to each reviewer and professional reviewers. And they take in, say, the 20 professional reviews of of Star Wars in the original Star Wars, A New Hope. They assign a score depending on how the review is written, and they take some kind of aggregate or average of those scores, and they normalize it between 0 and 100. Yeah, and I think anything, somebody can correct me, I think anything 60% and above is considered fresh. Yeah, or something like that. And anything below that is considered a terrible thing, or yeah, it's considered rotten. So yeah, so that's essentially it. Does that answer your question? Yep. Okay. Yes?
Oh, I was just going to ask, that was the Rotten Tomatoes critic score, not the user score?
Critic score, absolutely. Yeah. No, I haven't taken user score. Sorry? They're all critic scores. I haven't taken user scores or anything of that sort. Yeah, you take user scores, they're all over the place. There's I think The Last Jedi had this huge backlash, and they really brought down the aggregate user score. So there's a lot of that going on as well. Sorry? Well, I think the critical score is absolutely fine. Let's find out, actually. So Last Jedi is about 1.3 billion. So it should be just above the mark over there. So Last Jedi should be, I'm guessing it's this one right here or that one right there. Yeah. I can actually, yeah. So yeah, you had a question? Oh, okay, yes. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Oh no, absolutely. In fact, there seems to be that pattern. Obviously, if you're an insider, I'm guessing this is not news to anyone. But obviously, if Iron Man did well, Iron Man 2 received a lot of that credit. A lot of people went to see the bumped up opening day revenues for Iron Man 2. So I think you're seeing that backlash. So the backlash against Phantom Menace, for example, I think manifested in Attack of Clones, because Attack of Clones is the only one, besides Solo, that's below $1 billion. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. Yes.
What's that? Previous slide?
Sure.
Yeah.
This one? Yeah.
Is there any reason why Disney just changed their strategy and started releasing it in December as opposed to May? Any specific reason in the data that tells you that?
No, not really. I think the only reason, as far as I can make out, was that if I had to guess based on other things I've looked at, it was not to clash with kind of other Marvel movies, Avengers or something of that sort.
Summer, so
Exactly. Yeah. Ah. Okay. Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, cool. Right. Right. Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so, well, that was the reason for December. Yes?
You pointed out that these last three movies prior to Solo were all released in
December.
and they're much more recent. I'm curious if you had the chance to look at the idea that the movie industry may have changed significantly since even 2005, let alone the 90s, the 80s, and the 70s. It's really not the same industry anymore. So the release strategies could be very different than they were even 15 years ago.
Oh no, absolutely. Definitely the patterns have changed. That's something. Given more time, I could have had a look at the release dates and seen how they change across the years. But there's still, May and the summer still have a significant bump. So yeah, but I looked at the aggregate. No, but you're absolutely right. That itself, that could be probably a talk in itself, just looking at patterns throughout the decades. Yeah. Yes.
Have we considered like the opening box office? Because a huge chunk of the revenue is from the opening box office.
Yes.
The opening box office is highly correlated to the marketing spend. Like if they put a big chunk of money spending on the marketing campaign.
Oh, 100%.
For sure.
No, absolutely.
I did a similar analysis years ago. Like we want to know what's the relationship between opening box office with the marketing spend. And we believe there's a highly correlated relationship between these two.
Oh, I totally believe that. Where exactly did you get the data for the marketing spend?
Like I used to work for a production company.
Okay.
Like yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I agree with you completely. In fact, I was trying to see if I could get a breakdown of the marketing data, of the marketing spend versus the rest of the budget, but I didn't have good data for that. It turns out they just give estimates for whatever reasons. Yeah. But no, I totally believe it. I don't know how much was spent on Solo. Obviously, anecdotally, I have no idea whether there was a huge marketing push or there wasn't. So, yes.
Another question that's
Sure.
nagging me. Did you have a chance to look at what all of these movies opened against? Like, let's say the next 4 top-grossing movies that opened that same weekend. I'm wondering if it's possible Solo got unlucky enough to open against the best movie of the summer when it came out, versus the others got luckier.
No, absolutely. I actually agree with you to the extent it's the punchline of my talk, but thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, but it's totally, no, that's exactly right. I'm actually surprised nobody brought it up even before this. But no, you're completely right. The way, at least from the data I've seen, is that you're getting a whole bunch of movies that are becoming more and more, towards the blockbuster phase. They're spending more and more on individual ones. And this kind of gap between, you've got a bunch of really low budget movies and you've just got the studios just spending, $200, $300 million on a single movie has really become the norm. And if that's happening, definitely you're going up against, very stiff competition. And I find it a little bit surprising because I think in a lot of cases, the competition is coming from the studio's own movie sometimes. Yeah, I just found it very unusual. Yeah, I grew up in Bombay where the movie industry was very kind of, very collusive. There were a few old business families and they kind of controlled it and they said, all right, you're releasing on this Friday, we'll release our movies 3 weeks after that. We'll give you a little bit of lead time. Next time you scratch my back. Yeah, and I'm just surprised that even within studios, this doesn't seem to be the case over here right now.
They do it. They do it here as well.
They do it? Okay.
Yeah, but sometimes it works the other way also. Like not this movie, but the previous Tarantino movie had a huge issue with that because he came in with Avengers, and Avengers, because it was such a good movie, it stayed a month in the movie theater. So when his movie came in, they didn't allow it to run in certain theaters. They literally told the theaters, if you run any other movie than ours, then we won't give you any more Avenger movies or anything like that. So they do use that. It's just they use it both ways. Either if studios agree, like I think X-Men was a big example. The last one that came out was a flop, and it came out right after the Endgame, Avengers 8 Endgame.
Wait, the last Avengers, which was a flop?
So right after that, I believe there was X-Men.
X-Men, right.
Which was purchased now by
Dark Phoenix.
no Dark Phoenix. Dark Phoenix.
Dark Phoenix.
Came out after the last Avenger.
Right.
And as you know, there's also the fact that audiences get burned out with superhero movies. You just watch the best movie ever.
Absolutely.
Then a week later, you want to go watch X-Men. A lot of people would not different timeline, they might have done way better.
I agree with you. There's a lot of blockbuster fatigue. Definitely, that's this kind of blockbuster model is leading towards. I mean, how many, blockbuster movies are you going to see at any given time, right? The tickets are super expensive these days. Yeah, and these are usually if you want to go see these movies, you're going to see it in an expensive theater with IMAX or whatever. So there's only so much. Yeah, no, totally.
And I think that might answer the question they had earlier about Star Wars coming out on Wednesday, the very first one.
Right.
There's a possibility that there were other movies coming out later, and they needed to get people to spend the money in the theater before they go to the other movies.
I agree with that. That sounds reasonable, but I can also kind of make the point that on Wednesday or Thursdays, it would be a slow opening because, there would be weekdays. How many people would actually go and spend?
I think it was one of those movies. The first Star Wars, at least, the marketing was very limited. They spent
Okay.
more money on the production, and part of it was that it was one of those movies they released on Wednesday. Everyone was talking about it. By Friday, everyone wanted to watch it.
Ah,
So it was like that. And I know they had an early release specifically for that, and it was not a lot of marketing for that early release. It was one of those movies that no one talked about.
it's word of mouth.
Everyone who watched it just told everyone about it, pretty much.
I think that hypothesis actually I think holds true because their budget was not that significant for the time. It was 45 million adjusted in today's dollars,
Yeah, it
which
was
is not much.
expected to be a huge movie.
Yeah. No, I think that absolutely holds. So a couple of things. So, we go back to the same thing. May turns out to be fairly, May turns out to be fairly good for business. It's not clear that it should have been released in December. There's definitely not a very strong case for it. So why exactly did Solo fail? Obviously, if you Google it right now, you'll find like a gazillion articles all over the place. So everybody's got 15 reasons why Solo failed, et cetera, et cetera. I've mentioned a few of them, but they're literally, I think, about 30 or 40 of them. Yeah, a few of them was backlash against The Last Jedi. Ron Howard also mentioned that he said Twitter trolls, and I was kind of wondering what he was talking about, but that's what it was. Too small a gap between Star Wars movies. Again, Star Wars fatigue. I think Last Jedi was just about less than 6 months prior in December. You've got lukewarm critics reviews. We've seen, compared to other Star Wars movies, it was way lower. They talked about the cinematography. They said the colors were washed out. They were doing a whole bunch of other things. And obviously, they complained about the casting. There were a whole bunch of other issues as well. So this is my 2 bits, and which was essentially that they did go up against significant competition at that time. This is Infinity War was released about a month prior, on the 28th of April. And exactly as you said, it kind of flowed into, it did so well that it flowed into and impacted the business. But I think even more than Infinity War was Deadpool 2. It was actually, I love Deadpool 2. So just one last metric over here. I've mentioned the box. I've mentioned the box office because that kind of shows, the blockbuster status or where it is in the blockbuster hierarchy. Infinity War did about $2 billion. Deadpool did $785 million. So if you only have the budget to see, if you have these 3 movies to choose from, Infinity War, Deadpool 2, or Solo, there's no way you're choosing Solo. You're choosing one of the other 2 movies, most of the time. If you've got money for a second one, you'll go to, again, one of the other 2. You're not going to choose Solo. The release dates, 1 month prior for Infinity War, compared to Solo. Solo, if you remember, was 25th. Deadpool to May 25th. Deadpool was exactly 1 week prior, May 18th. Then I said, let's look at the business specifically on those days. So for the Memorial Day weekend, 25th to 28th, Avengers Infinity War still made about, 22.5 million. Deadpool made about 54 million. I mean, just these 2 movies, collectively between them, took about $76 million worth of business away, just on that one Memorial Day weekend. And obviously that affects, as you pointed out, it affects momentum. But I wanted to check, we all hear stories of movies recovering from, bad opening day momentum. I was like, but the first month is crucial, right? If it fails in the first month, it's game over. First month, Infinity War made another 67 million, Deadpool made 145. A total of $212 million was spent on these two movies that could not be spent on Solo. So that itself was, that itself I think was the biggest factor right there. Okay, so I did check one more metric. I said, would have Christmas looked better? Because Christmas has some competition. These were some high-grossing movies over there. Mary Poppins Returns is not exactly a blockbuster, but it still made $350 million. Bumblebee made about $468. Spider-Man was a surprise sleeper hit for an animated movie at $375 for the kind of budget it came in on. And Aquaman was obviously the big budget one. You can see the release dates are kind of staggered throughout December. My point is, I'm not entirely sure what kind of, it's not that it's going into December with any lack of competition either. So in generally speaking, I would say, sure, December is not really a great choice. But specifically speaking, I don't think December would have been a great choice either. So my question, so why did it fail? I think it's, yes, go on.
I have a question.
Sure.
Aquaman actually raises a very good question because Aquaman, the majority of the money they made it in the Chinese market. It didn't exist 10 years ago.
Right.
Now the Chinese market or the Indian market is like two of the biggest ones,
Right.
population-wise, and both markets allow you to pretty much increase the box office as much as you want, but the type of movie makes a difference, right? So like Mary Poppins, we grew up with that here. In China, people didn't grow up with Mary Poppins.
Absolutely.
So I think that makes a huge difference. And Bumblebee, the reason it made that much money is pretty much all the other Transformer movies, supposedly action movies, are very famous there, more than here. So, well, not more than here, but it's pretty high. So I think Bumblebee was a follow-up of all the other Transformer movies. So there is a big factor of international market as well and culture that goes into that market based on the movies.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I looked at that and I said, should I differentiate? Because I could differentiate domestic gross versus foreign gross. But I really don't know. I mean, that would take another fairly sophisticated model to actually even understand what movies kind of work there. I obviously don't have enough tribal knowledge, and I've seen certain movies work in the Chinese market, which I'm looking at, I'm like, how are they even getting the references, essentially? They're very Western references. Yes, sorry, go on.
Supposedly, within the last, say, 5 years, 90% of Hollywood big budget revenue is coming from overseas, and it's coming
Right.
mainly these kind of movies. And the reason is most other countries can't do as good a job making these high-tech movies, and you don't need to speak English to understand more or less what's going on. It's superheroes, it's stuff that you literally don't need to understand English to understand what's going on. Whereas if it's comedy or it's drama, you tend to prefer what your own culture is producing, and you can do a very good job at that.
That makes sense.
They're not that expensive to make.
No, I hear that, yeah. But for better or for worse, I think that's kind of the description for most blockbuster movies, right? You don't need to think or listen to the dialogue. So, yeah. So, yeah, so I just think, in terms of would it have done better in December, I don't think so. I think it's just becoming increasingly difficult now for any blockbuster movie to achieve the kind of box office returns its predecessors had. There's too much competition. It's become an arms race. Who the hell thought studios would be spending, $300-400 million on a movie? I think it was John Carter of Mars. They spent over $200 million, and I think the head of the studio, I believe it was Disney, I don't remember, got sacked over it. Yeah, and after that, the arms race continued. I didn't think that it didn't have a damping effect at all.
Really, the whole model's changing now with streaming, so that's where they're going to.
Absolutely, and absolutely. Yeah.
Factor in full streaming model, subscription-based services, and retained subscribers. That's going to factor in a different paradigm.
Completely. I've taken inflation rates for the Star Wars movies, but that's actually a very simple model. Technically, I should be checking, among other things, ticket prices in 77 or something, but really, it's about good substitutes or perfect substitutes, which is essentially in 77, you had a VCR or something like that and a 20-inch TV. And these days, you can have a 65-inch TV and you've got 4K videos to compete with a cinematic experience. So did somebody have a question or? Yes.
Great presentation, and clearly there are many factors existed for a long time and still exists today. A lot of it is are the children in school or not, or teenagers in school or not. My question was about your observations, particularly relevant to the conference, on what studios or what modern data tools are the studios using today to try to impact when they should release movies, because many of the factors aren't changing, again, in terms of basic human behavior, the calendar, the holidays, when are teenagers in school.
I'm not sure actually. I don't know. I'm not sure what the studios are using in terms of data or in terms of data analysis. I guess somebody with more inside knowledge, maybe RT, you have a better idea on something like that. But from the little conversations I've had, they're pretty behind the curve compared to tech companies, which is not surprising at all. Yeah. Yes.
So I will say, if you look on things like Glassdoor or Indeed and various job websites, the studios are hiring pretty big in data science right now. Specifically, I see a lot from Sony, Warner Brothers, Disney, constantly. So they are ramping up. Probably all of them are, because that's happen to be ones I've seen.
Sony's been building up a data science team for some time now. Yeah. Yes.
I think a big factor that people don't, studios specifically don't look into is sometimes marketing does not mean a budget. Sometimes marketing could be an idea that costs $10, but that can change your movie. Like there's certain movies that no one cared about, but because of this small marketing, or like someone comes up with an idea, spreads it online, that costs you $10, and that can sell your movie. Like there are certain movies like Get Out, for example, it was a very cheap movie to make, but you know the marketing was just genius and it was just creative. It didn't cost much, but it was creative. So I think
Yeah.
that is a big.
No, definitely. I think it's part of the blockbuster culture as well, that you've just got this sort of bazooka style of marketing, just barrage people with advertising and ad spend, rather than have the patience and the craft for word of mouth. Yeah.
I don't want to derail the discussion. This is awesome, but just to time check, we're at time. So once you guys are done with the session, please, we want to invite you and encourage you to go to the networking session from like around 6:20 to 7:30. So please join us there, but keep going.
Yes. No, go for it.